Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolutely incredible story of faith and devotion straight out of Hindu mythology. We are going to explore the humbling parable of Lord Jagannath and a deeply devoted woman named Gumti. It's one of those stories that really forces us to stop and question our own reliance on material wealth. So let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. To truly understand the sheer depth of this story, we first need to meet our main subject, Gomti. She's a woman living in a small village, and when I say she's poor, I mean she has absolutely nothing. Zero. As our story kicks off, she actually hasn't eaten a single bite of food in 2 whole days. But here's the wild part. Despite physically starving, her spiritual conviction, completely unbreakable. She drops this phrase that essentially forms the philosophical backbone of the whole story. Hunger affects the body, not faith. Wow. Just think about that. It's a super powerful, almost radical realization. Her body is literally failing, but her trust in the divine stays totally untouched by her physical suffering.
Well, the narrative quickly ramps up into a profound moral test. Gomti finally gets her hands on just one piece of food in her entire house, a single solitary roti. And right as she's about to eat it, a young boy shows up at her door begging for food. So now she's faced with this impossible choice, right? Does she save her own life or feed this starving stranger? Gomti doesn't even hesitate. No way. She hands over her absolute last lifeline, willingly embracing her own starvation. She figures, if her Lord Jagannath has taken responsibility for the whole world, she really has no reason to fear for her own survival.
But, as you know, every great story needs a counterpoint. And here, that's Hariram. He represents this stark dialectical contrast to Gomti. He's this wealthy, arrogant villager who operates entirely on human logic, material wealth, and honestly, a lot of cynicism. When he catches wind that Gomti is giving away her very last meal, he publicly ridicules her. He mocks her blind faith, declaring that, hey, devotion doesn't fill stomachs, only food and money do. You can really see the clash here, right? Gomti's absolute, rock-solid trust in divine providence going head-to-head with Hariram's cold reliance on earthly logic. As the day drags on, Gomti's hunger obviously gets much, much worse. Now, a kind-hearted neighbor actually comes by and secretly offers her some food. It's a perfectly rational solution. But Gomti does something completely astonishing. She turns it down. She looks at her neighbor and says, "If I eat your roti, how will my Jagannath get the opportunity to complete my test?" She completely surrenders to the situation. To her, this extreme hunger isn't a punishment, it's a divine exam. Relying on human intervention, in her mind, would just mean her trust in God wasn't quite complete. Now, this unwavering devotion, it absolutely infuriates our skeptical Hariram. To prove his point that faith is useless without practical resources, he issues this incredibly cruel challenge to the rest of the village. He declares that absolutely no one is allowed to help Gomti. If anyone even secretly slips her a scrap of food, he promises to completely ruin their livelihood. He systematically cuts off all avenues of human support. Basically, he wants to back Gomti into a corner where literally only a miracle can save her, because he's 100% convinced that a miracle is never going to come. And this brilliantly illustrates where the narrative shifts from a simple test of faith straight into the realm of the supernatural. The village suddenly gets gripped by this series of eerie, totally unexplainable events. Let's trace this timeline because it's pretty wild. At midnight, the temple bells start ringing violently, entirely on their own. By morning, this unnatural swarm of crows is circling Hariram's house. Afternoon rolls around, and his super secure food godown just shatters open, but nothing is actually stolen. And then, by evening, the majestic, booming sound of conch shells echoes out from an empty temple. The tension in that village is just palpable. Hariram, naturally, is desperately trying to brush all this off as just cheap tricks. But we really have to ask ourselves, were these merely coincidences? Or were they the literal footprints of the divine, stepping right into the mortal world? The atmosphere is just thick with anticipation. Meanwhile, Gomti, who is starving but spiritually wide awake, keeps her front door wide open. You see, the young boy had promised her earlier that an unexpected guest would arrive that night, and her faith tells her she needs to be ready. Sure enough, in the dead of night, a mysterious sadhu, a wandering holy man, appears right at Gomti's dilapidated doorway asking for shelter. Now, Gomti doesn't have a single grain of food or even a piece of firewood, but she immediately welcomes him in. When she apologizes for her incredibly small, empty home, the sadhu drops this profound truth. He says, "Where there is the name of God, the place is never small." She's entirely willing to host him despite her absolute rock-bottom poverty, proving that her generosity is really tied to the endless capacity of her heart. Okay, so we've reached the incredible climax of Gumti's test. The sadhu is hungry, but like we said, Gumti has nothing. Literally nothing. But the sadhu gently tells her to go over to her cold, empty stove and lift the lid off her cooking pot. Driven entirely by faith, Gumti reaches out, lifts it, and an impossible miracle happens. Inside that previously empty pot is fresh, steaming hot food. And not just any food. It exactly resembles the sacred offerings that are usually served at the great temple of Lord Jagannath. Her faith has physically, literally materialized into sustenance. And miracles? They don't just stop in Gumti's kitchen. The very next morning, a frantic commotion breaks out across the village. People rush into the main temple and make a completely logic-defying discovery. The sacred idol of Lord Jagannath, which is usually kept absolutely pristine, has fresh mud, dust, and tiny little blades of grass stuck right to its feet. And get this, it wasn't just random temple dust. It was the exact same dirt from the humble, unpaved pathways of their very own village. The villagers are completely, utterly stunned. One of them whispers a realization that basically changes everything for them. It looks as if the Lord himself walked and returned. The emotional weight of this moment is just massive, especially for all the skeptics in town. The divine hadn't just sent help from afar, you know? The evidence suggested that the Lord had physically stepped right down from the altar, walked through the dusty paths of their village, and personally visited the home of his most devoted follower. Back over at Gomti's house, the final piece of this giant puzzle falls into place. The young boy who originally begged for her last roti, he comes back. He looks at her and asks if she recognizes him. Gomti, whose heart kind of sensed the truth from the very get-go, acknowledges that he's clearly no ordinary child. And that's when the boy reveals his true divine identity. He was the hungry child at her door. He was the mysterious sadhu in the night. Every single time she had called out to God, he was the one standing right at her threshold. Let's just pause here for a second and look at this. Really look at it. Because this comparison is the absolute core lesson of this entire text. Think about what humans typically offer to the divine. We're talking gold, money, elaborate, expensive rituals. Now contrast that with what Gomti brought to the table. Her own starvation, unshakable faith, and just pure, selfless love. When the Lord reveals himself to her, he makes it explicitly clear exactly why he chose to visit her over those wealthy temples. She didn't just give him a piece of bread, she gave him her complete and total trust. And this brings us to this beautiful, truly joyous revelation. The divine voice asks, does God love golden plates or love? Does God want wealth or devotion? It's this booming rhetorical question that completely shatters the illusions of the material world. It turns out the ultimate currency of the universe isn't gold, it isn't power. It is pure, unadulterated devotion. The divine is just looking for the sincerity of our hearts. So the crucial point is how this revelation completely transforms the world around it, starting right with our ultimate skeptic, Hariram. Having witnessed the sheer magnitude of Gomti's faith in seeing the actual physical proof of these miracles, Hariram's arrogance just crumbles to dust. He falls to his knees and actually begs Gomti for forgiveness. He finally truly realizes that devotion infinitely outweighs material wealth. He completely changes his ways, even pledging his own wealth to feed the hungry. Cynical logic ultimately had to bow to selfless love. Now, when Hariram is there begging for forgiveness, Gomti's response is it's incredibly profound. She doesn't hold a grudge, she doesn't gloat or say, I told you so. She simply tells him that it isn't really her place to forgive, but she notes that those who teach us to love are the ones who forgive. That right there shows that true spiritual devotion is deeply rooted in endless compassion. If you truly love God, you just cannot hold on to hatred or bitterness toward your fellow human beings, even the ones who have wronged you the most. The ripple effect of Gomti's quiet, single act of sacrifice ended up completely revolutionizing her entire community. Hariram and the rest of the villagers make this collective, incredibly powerful pledge. From this day forward, the first grain of food in every single household will go to a hungry person. They promise that absolutely no one in their community will ever sleep hungry again. So Gomti's faith didn't just save her own life, it effectively ended hunger in her village by awakening the empathy of everyone around her. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to turn this ancient parable back to you. Ask yourself, what would you sacrifice to help a stranger in the darkest of nights? It's a really profound question about where we place our trust and what we truly, actually value. I really hope this story gives you something deep to chew on today. Thank you so much for joining me.